Welcome to many of you who are out there, and this is a part of a series of opportunities on campus, and it is a celebration of women in the STEM fields, and that would be science, technology, engineering, and math. My name is Lori Foster, and I'm here to serve as moderator to a guest panel of women in science. And so to that end, I'd like to introduce you just briefly to them, and then they're going to share a little bit more of their details. So first off is Molly Raymaker, and she is a neuroscience biofeedback specialist in neurotherapy. And next to her is Cindy Moranti. She's a scientific investigator at Van Andel Institute. And then we have Dr. Eleanor Gates, and she is a staff astronomer at the University of California Lick Observatory. And finally, Elise Tripp, who is a senior environmental scientist serving at Fishback, Thompson, Carr, and Huber, I believe it is. So thank you, and very, very glad you're here, and we appreciate your time today. Ladies, we'd like to have us start a series of conversations, the first being this, and that is to have you introduce your work to us, and what led you to this type of career. So if we could, Molly, I think we might start with you, and if you could share a little bit about your background, and we'll kind of work down through the other panelists.
Very good. I started off in a choice in psychology, originally going through my schooling, and I went through Western and took on a counseling degree at master's level. From there, I kind of fell into some work in the medical field, doing biofeedback for chronic pain management, and down at St. Mary's Hospital here local. And really felt like I had a wonderful team of a varied background medical specialists in order to learn and to grow and just to grow up there. From there, I ended up finding a little bit of a niche in what's called neurofeedback. And what that involves is using a surface EEG reading of the brain in order to teach the brain how to self-regulate. So we've used the application in a large number of areas, all the way from sleep disorders, attentional and learning disorders, to personality disorders, to peak performance and mental stamina. We've just recently entered the golf world, pro golfers, and so it's fascinating to see a tool that's got a very broad stretch, but that also has taught me volumes in understanding each of us on an individual level how brains work and how our behavior and emotion plays out from what's happening neuroelectrically in the brain.
And Cindy, how about yourself?
Okay, so I basically decided to major in biology as an undergraduate at Southern Illinois University in Carbondale, Illinois, and I really wasn't sure what I wanted to do with that for a long time. And then at one point I took a microbiology class, so that's the study of microorganisms, and what I learned in that class was about how these microorganisms cause disease. So all these diseases that you'd heard about as a child, bubonic plague and everything, that these were the organisms that were the causes of these diseases, and that scientists had actually discovered them, and that by discovering the organisms and how they work, they were able to come up with cures and things and understand the disease process. And so at that point, it became clear to me that that was something that I wanted to do, is to make discoveries about diseases that would ultimately help patients down the road. And so at that time, microbiology, we had antibiotics, and it seemed like most of the diseases had been cured, and we had viruses and vaccines, and there was one area that struck me that hadn't been cured yet, and that was cancer. So this was a whole new area at the time I started school, and there were actually tools and models and things out there that could be used to try to understand disease. So I really started out, as an undergraduate, really interested in doing research from the day one, once I learned that this was something that you could actually do as a career. And so initially then I got a master's degree right after that to learn some more lab skills that I thought would be necessary. And then I worked for a while, 6 years as a technician, really in cancer research, really understanding the problems, and then decided that I really wanted to go for that PhD where I could be in control of the research problem and didn't have to have someone else telling me how to do my research and my science. And so that was a big step. So I basically enrolled at Harvard Medical School as a graduate student in the medical school there, and spent 5 years getting my PhD and then 5 years doing a postdoctoral training fellowship before getting a job here at the Institute. So it's been a long road, but it's been a lot of fun, and the background knowledge that I have in basic sciences is huge, and it's helpful in trying to solve a very complex problem like cancer.
Was there anything in that brought you to the Van Andel, particularly given the options that were out there for cancer?
Well, so the Van Andel Institute specializes in cancer research, so that is really what, at least at the moment, what their focus area was. Really, in science, it's about connections and who you know. And the director of the institute was a really good friend of one of my advisors. So when I was looking for a job, of course, you always go to your advisor and say, "Help me find a job." And she basically said, "Well, you know, Dave Vanderwood is starting this cancer institute in Grand, you know, and would you like to join it?" Well, Dr. Vanderwood was very famous, very well known in the cancer field, and so of course, if he's going to, open a cancer institute, why wouldn't you want to go there? And her only problem was, well, the problem is it's in Michigan. Now, this is coming from someone at Harvard, in Boston on the East Coast, and it's like, well, that really isn't a problem for me. I grew up in the Midwest. I understand. I'm kind of tired of Boston. It's very exhausting. So it was really a good match, and so that's really how I found out about the position and got the job.
And one last question, Cindy, do you do some teaching as well? Part-time?
Yeah, so I'm actually an adjunct professor at Michigan State University as well in the physiology department, and so through the Van Andel Institute we have graduate students from MSU. I have 3 in my lab right now. The Institute also just started last year its own graduate school program, and so I teach in that program there as well as at MSU, so I do have a lot of contact with graduate students in the program.
Okay, our next individual, Eleanor.
Okay, well, I think like many astronomers, I've kind of always had an interest in astronomy. I remember being a kid and watching those cool shows on by Nova about black holes and galaxies, and I always thought it was fascinating. And I was really good at math and science, just that's where my talent was. So it seemed a no-brainer to go to college and major in math and astrophysics. And I actually went to a women's college and got a slightly different experience than many science students get. But then went on to graduate school in New Mexico in physics with a concentration in astrophysics to actually use my math skills and do something interesting. And I thought at first I'd be a theoretical astrophysics physicist because that's, most of black holes are pretty theoretical. But I had the good fortune to fall into a research assistantship at the U.S. Air Force Phillips Laboratory and start working on some of the hardware of astronomy and working on some of the instrumentation, a high-tech instrumentation called adaptive optics that lets us get clearer images through the telescopes. And working in the laboratory there with the actual hardware, I realized, wow, I found myself a new career. I really enjoyed being in the laboratory and have my hands on it. I still enjoy researching black holes, and I did this as my research. And then even before I finished my PhD, Lick Observatory was looking for someone specializing in this technology I had been working on. It was brand new in astronomy. And they gave me a position where I could do both research, and I do actually do science on black holes at the centers of distant galaxies, measuring their masses and the dynamics around them, and also build high-tech instruments for the telescope. So I get to do my 2 favorite interests in my job. I was incredibly lucky to get these opportunities.
Thank you. And next, Elise.
Okay, I spent a lot of time thinking about how I got to where I am right now. When I was in high school, there really wasn't very much offered at all in the way of career guidance. And my dad probably was the person who influenced me the most. And he wanted me to go into engineering because I was good in math and science, and he thought I could get a good job with that. I did get into a very nice engineering program at Cornell University. I actually got into it twice, but because I applied for my freshman and my sophomore years. But when I got the curriculum, I had absolutely no enthusiasm for what I would be learning in this program. So I ended up being a biology major at Wheaton College in Illinois, which is a liberal arts college. And during that time, that was the point in which the environmental movement was really starting to take off. And that really appealed to me, to get a job in that field and try and make positive impacts with good stewardship of the earth, basically. the thing I did after my undergrad was then to go on to graduate school at the University of California, Davis, where I got a master's in soil science. I think at that point, what my goal or my idealistic vision would be to go to like Africa and plant trees, and that didn't really pan out at all. Which often happens as you go down this path in life. What you think you might want to do often doesn't happen. What I did do when I graduated was to marry my best friend and move to Pittsburgh, where he finished graduate school and got a PhD, and I got a job in environmental consulting. And as a soil scientist, and I worked there full-time for 3 years. At the point where he finished his PhD, he got a job at Grand Valley State, and we moved to Michigan. I had a baby, took a year off, and then started looking for work and was employed by Fishbeck, Thompson, Carr, and Huber. And I a little over-prepared. I have some slides here to illustrate what I actually do in my job. There, thanks. This is where I work. We have several different offices. Our main office is in Grand Rapids. And I work, as far as science go, I work where science intersects with business. So we help people solve their problems, do what they want to do, realize their vision, help them with their operations. My area of specialty right now is in wetland consulting. I go out to places like this. I figure out, do you have a wetland? Where is the wetland boundary? I flag it. We have people survey it. If people need a permit to do work like filling or anything with a regulated wetland, I help them go through the permitting process. I help them. Oh, should I need to hold this? Sorry. I help them design new wetlands if they have to build wetlands to compensate for wetland loss. Really anything with wetlands I help with. I also do endangered species reviews. Sometimes there are concerns during development that there may be impacts to threatened and endangered species, so I help investigate that, evaluate the existing plant communities, these are some of the species that I have looked for in my job at different sites. And then another big area that is gaining a lot of momentum is the area of stormwater management and low impact development. And I'm involved in that too, with writing stormwater management plans. The middle figure is a map that shows different watersheds. And there are various, we get grant money to help communities write management plans for watersheds. And then also low impact development. Michigan just released a very large document with low impact development techniques in it, and I'm involved. What those are is like, how do you manage stormwater so it doesn't get into creeks too quickly? There's a lot of different techniques. You may have heard of rain gardens. That's one of the techniques that's used to help detain water, and I help design those, do planting plans. Native plantings, I'm involved with that. There, a lot of different things like that. I wanted to bring this to, I'm just one woman out of very many who work at Fishbeck. These are pictures of just some of the women who are in was it STEM professions? I made a list of all of them, and the person who compiled the slide couldn't get them all on there. So those are the faces, and those are all the different jobs that those women do. I would say most of the women at Fishbeck, the biggest groups are in engineering, especially civil engineering, and also as environmental specialists in my department, working with industry, helping them with air emissions, managing their hazardous waste, managing their chemicals, doing the required reporting to the state, to the federal government. Just really, there's just a lot of different professions out there. And I think maybe that slide leads us into our next section.
Good segue. And so let's do that. Earlier, some of the panelists here spoke about the influence that a career planning, a career placement, a counseling in the area had perhaps helped them, guided their path. Would any of you like to elaborate a little bit more on that as far as how you was there people who bore influence in your early years that brought you to thinking a career in science was an opportunity for you?
My father was a chemist, and my mother was a chemist, although my mother couldn't work because there was a policy in the university that you couldn't be employed in the same department as your husband. So she actually had a master's degree in chemistry and was basically a housewife. But my father was a chemist and a professor, and I actually took chemistry from him in college, which is a really strange. I had to get the best grade in the class, right? But I really had not much guidance. So I sort of lived kind of a protected life. I mean, I knew my dad was into chemistry, but he never talked about it much at home. But it did influence my thinking. I was a Girl Scout. I was out in the woods a lot. It's kind of a rural area. You just sort of, so I knew I was interested in biology, but didn't know what I wanted to do with it. Actually, as an undergraduate, I think I was quite discouraged by the people around me. So the guidance counselor said, "Why do you want to go to graduate school? You're a woman." Because I can. I know that, I guess my mother, actually proved that you could back in the 50s, right? That was possible, although there were, obviously barriers to her employment being where she was, and she made a certain sacrifice. But I thought, I'm going to do that, but I'm not going to make that sacrifice. So, I sort of had this idea that this was a shame, and that women who go to school should have this equal opportunity. So I don't really feel like as an undergraduate that I was really encouraged much. But as a master's student, I worked under a woman scientist who was very encouraging. And, so she had a family, and her husband was a scientist, and she was a scientist, and said, here's someone who can actually do this. And that was at Colorado State University. And she actually eventually became chairman of the department that I was in. So I think I've had really good female role models throughout the thing. I haven't always worked for women, and even the men that I worked for the most part, were pretty fair and generous. They really gave me no reason to suspect that, as a woman, that I couldn't be a scientist for the most part, the people that are actually in science. It wasn't until I actually got to Harvard Medical School where I actually encountered maybe some issues, which we could talk about
Yeah, we
later.
will explore that, certainly. Wonderful. Anyone else that could speak to a bit of that?
Yeah, I was like her. I didn't have a whole lot of influence in school or anything, but I came from a scientific family. My father's a mathematician, my mother's a chemist, my stepfather's a physicist, and so there was never any question. My mom got her PhD in chemistry while I was in high school, and so she can do it. Why can't I? And then I was fortunate. I went to a women's college that is very prominent. Mount Holyoke College is very prominent for actually sending a lot of women into getting advanced degrees in science, in particular, and that was a great experience. Even though my professors, for the most part, were men, I was with other women students and we supported each other. And then I was also fortunate to go to a graduate school that had a large number, comparatively, of female graduate students in the department, so that we were a support network for each other, even though the faculty members and the people doing supervising us were all predominantly men. So.
Holly?
Yeah, I was going to say there's a common trend in terms of the family role models.
Yeah.
I think my father was probably my biggest influence as well. I was one of the first generation to be able to at least get to a master's level in the family, but he was in school and college as long as I've known him, and he actually graduated with his bachelor's degree in psychology about a year after I did. So it was interesting because we were taking classes together, and I didn't want to be anything like him. But so I was going to school to be a fine arts student and sculptist, and my sculpture professor took me aside after reading a number of my papers and critiquing some of the work that had been showing at the college, and he said, "You need to go take a psychology class." I said, "I'm that bad?" He said, "You'll be fine if you want to stay in this area, but in reading your papers, you have an element of being a detective, and I think you'd fit really well in exploring human behavior." And I dragged my feet because it was the last thing I wanted to do was to shadow my father. But I eventually took the class and learned that it was really easy because my father was always talking to me about all of those principles. He had never not been in class for one of those areas, so it was the easiest path at that point, and a heck of a lot easier than math. Sorry. For me, it was easier. So I had a lot of male colleagues, a lot of male teachers. I worked construction to get my way through college. And I think from that I took, even though I was kind of different ratio and didn't have much of a female support, I knew that I was right in there and that there was no reason that I should be stopped.
Thank you. Elise?
Yeah, well, I kind of mentioned my dad earlier. The thing I'd like to point out about him is that my grandparents were immigrants from Denmark. They both had 8th grade education. So I come from a family that didn't have college background, but when my dad came back from World War II, his high school agriculture teacher encouraged him to go on to college because it was free through the whatever it's called now, I can't remember. And so he ended up going straight through, got a PhD, and had in food chemistry and had a career in research and quality control. So from my dad, it was the same thing. There was never any doubt that I would go on and get the tools I needed, to have a career. That I think our focus and what I would do was different, but I'd like to credit him in when I kind of broke out of his mold of what he thought I should be. He never said a word. He always let me go my own path, and eventually I did get jobs, and I did get a career. But as far as role models go, I never really felt any impediments as far as doing what I wanted to do, as far as schooling or career is a little different, but as far as schooling goes, I always felt supported by both my male and female instructors. So I can't think of any one role model, though.
Okay, very good. Well, the other thing related, and then we're going to move on to a little different line of questioning, but just as a bit of your background, some of you have published as well. It was some length, at least when I see on your vitas. Can you speak to any of the merit, the hindrances, the hurdles around that, the acknowledgments that has afforded you? Does it have any story to tell, the value and role of publication? Cindy?
In my field, it's absolutely critical. Your promotion is based on publication because that indicates that you've been productive and you're generating new ideas and contributing to the field in some way. So it's an absolute must. It's a challenge. I think I was not a writer initially. I was not a very good writer. But at this level of the career, that's about all I do is write papers and write grants. And so you really kind of learn the language. It's very technical writing. It's not creative in that sense. But it is absolutely critical. So if you don't publish, then it's publish or perish, as we say in the field. So yeah, it is absolutely critical. It's also important to learn how to write properly and correctly. I think I had really good guidance. My 2 advisors, my graduate advisor and postdoc advisor, were both very good writers, and so I got lots of good tips from them on how to write properly. So it's been a challenge for me. It's probably the most challenging part of what I do, or at least initially. Gotten easier.
Another line of question, again, with a bit of your backgrounds. You have all mentioned, choices in your schools. Was it paramount for some of you in terms of guiding where life took you and the opportunities that it afforded you? Do schools matter in your estimation? Do you think there are some that are more inclined to women in science, or is that something that is dating a mindset? Do schools matter?
I would like to say no, schools don't matter, but I think it's a sad reality that some schools foster women in science much better than others. I know, at least in astronomy, we have panels that come around to various, at least graduate departments and to some extent undergraduate departments, to see, are they succeeding in having female students continue through to graduation? In astronomy, there's what we call the leaky pipeline that, usually the first year of undergraduate, the classes actually predominantly start out, mostly 50-50 as astronomy students in the introductory courses. And then you get to sophomore level courses, you lose a few more women. Get to the upper level courses, you lose a whole lot more. By the time you get to graduate school, you're down to maybe 1/3 of the students are women. But those finishing, so it's this leaky pipeline, and they're trying to figure out what's happening that we're losing talented students. and we don't know the answers yet, but it is an issue. Certainly the women's colleges, from my personal experience, are good because you don't have some of the peer pressures and stuff of male students around and changing dynamics. Now, my undergraduate experience was a little unusual because the astronomy major is a 5-college major, so you were taking classes at, say, University of Massachusetts and Amherst College, which are co-ed schools as well. And in those classes, I'd go from an all-women's environment into a co-ed environment where the women were the minority suddenly again. But the support networks of the women's college fostering the education. I'm sure co-ed schools can also do this sort of fostering. It's just that I don't have experience with that.
Anyone else want to speak to that, or?
Everything was pretty fine. And in biology, what we find, we have a leaky pipeline, but it doesn't start till after graduate school. So generally in biology, you see the same number of graduate students, men and women. It's when you get to my position, the chairmen of the departments and the people that are actually in charge, you find very few women. So I'm actually kind of pleased that the 2 women who trained me are both chairmen of the department at this point, which is sort of an amazing thing, as well as the 2 men that trained me. So, but I think at Harvard is where I encountered that first wall in terms of, when I started there, this was about year 98, 2000, or 88, 89, there were 3 women. So at the Harvard Medical School, there's probably 200 faculty. There were 3 tenured women faculty in that environment. Wow. So that tells you right away. And it was actually, I had to make a choice between that and Johns Hopkins. And Johns Hopkins was quite the opposite. There were actually quite a few women, but from my learning point of view and the types of programs I was interested in, Harvard really offered for me what I needed, the training I needed. So it was a hard choice to go from what appeared to be a really nicely mentored female environment to one that was probably not so. And it has changed, and of course we all heard about Dr. Summers and the whole issue with women at Harvard, right? So
Yes.
we went through all that. So it has changed some, but it's still very hard. It's not women friendly. So the upside of that is that you learn how to work in a men's world, which is what is important for success as a woman in science. Because let's face it, at this level, most of the people that you work with, at least in my field, are men, and particularly at the Van Andel Institute, I am the only woman scientist there. So you have to learn how to work in that world, and so the sooner you adapt to it, the better. I imagine the same for you, particularly in astronomy. Engineering is the same way, or at least my husband tells me about it all the time.
And that might vary from company to company too.
Right.
Yeah.
I was going to say, my college years I didn't find as much, but once I got into the medical setting, it was a wall. Being a woman in a boys' club was very difficult.
Yeah.
And that's actually taking us to where we would like to move in our next line of questions, and that is around what has been your particular experience, successes and or challenges in being a woman in a scientific field. So with that, I don't know if anyone would like to start us rather than me.
I'll never forget when I first got into neurofeedback, and Weige Holistic Center down at St. Mary's had given me the opportunity to explore neurofeedback, and was it beneficial to invest in, to offer to the community. And so it was an area that we were kind of exploring and piloting, and within the first 3 months I had some amazing client results that I had just never been taught that it was possible. And here these people were transforming within 3 months after having 10 years being in the chronic mentally ill category. And I'll never forget the first time I had a woman who was very highly explosive and bipolar, as well as blood pressure issues, and within the 3 months she totally normalized, no longer required any psych meds, no longer required blood pressure medications, and no longer met criteria for a mental health diagnosis. And I was totally floored by what I was experiencing with my clientele. And there was a neuroscience meeting that they had asked me to attend, and I had come down the stairs all ecstatic because this woman she'd broken ground for me. And I walked into the meeting totally amazed and began sharing my story. And the books slammed, the chairs slid back, they stood up and left the room saying, "This is absolutely preposterous." Some of them never talked to me again, but I persisted and remained there doing that work for 8 years, and then went off into my own private practice to continue the work. And much of that mentality, even while all of that the miracles were happening, was yeah. They'd send their family and friends, but wouldn't necessarily embrace it as a wholehearted modality for the community. So it was just an interesting demeanor to be poo-pooed, yet somewhat allowed.
Thank you, Mary. I'm sure there may be some follow-up on that question in a little while. Absolutely. All right. Anyone else? Cindy, perhaps?
Yeah, so what I encountered at Harvard was a little bit different. So when I started graduate school, I actually had a 3-year-old son, which, in my mind, watching other females go through careers, and it didn't seem to me that to be such an obstacle. And of course, the problem with that is that you have to go pick the child up at 5 o'clock, and scientists at Harvard don't do that. they work 24/7 basically. And so the PI that I worked for, he accepted me in the lab. He knew I had a child. He had a daughter, but his wife took care of all that. He didn't take care of it. So there was this perception initially early on that I was taking time out of the lab that other students weren't. But I also was able to manage my time in such a way that I could produce just as much work as everyone else who stood around and talked and gabbed and had coffee 3 times a day, even though they were in the lab all the time. So it's about time management. So that that was one of my strengths. But it was interesting so I spent 5 years in that lab, and towards the end of the 5 years, my son got into better schools. We had babysitters. We actually managed him a little bit better. So I was actually able to spend more time in the lab. And at the end of my career, my PI comes to me and says, "I noticed that you've been in the lab a lot more lately." It's just sort of, not really recognizing and just general statements, which I think in today's market, if these statements had been said, in today's environment, you might have sued him for. But he didn't really understand the things that he was saying. He comes in one day, and his wife was a scientist. His wife was an MD, PhD. She was raising children, running a neural clinic, and trying to do lab research. And he was trying to do lab research and get tenure and do all that, and they had 2 children. And he walks in the lab one day and says, "I think women in science should only have 1 child," which... at the time, my mouth was going like that. So because clearly in his family, adding that second child created a burden on his wife, but he wasn't stepping in necessarily to
play a role.
To play a role, and so that was really the first evidence. So he didn't realize that was a prejudice statement because for his, I have a wife and scientist. I understand. No, you really don't. So that was, and then the second was after you get your PhD, you're going to do a postdoctoral fellowship. So I had applied to a particular laboratory on campus that I was very interested in working as a postdoc. Now, this particular gentleman was a single bachelor, had been for many, many years. In my mind, it was not at all relevant what my family situation was with respect to a laboratory where I'm going to. I don't put it on my resume. It's not mentioned. I don't even, it's not part of how you should be evaluated. But at some point, my PI talked to this person and said, she's got a child, and I'm not sure she can function. He really went to this PI and basically, and the reason I know it is because he told me, right? So he thought that this was okay. And there was another graduate student in the same lab, had a child, male. He was going to another really big famous lab, but you can bet that he did not go to the other PI and say, this researcher has a child, and therefore there might be an issue. So, at this point, I could have sued, but that's kind of silly. You're going to kill your career doing that. But those are the kinds of things you see. And the fact that the PI is telling you this indicates to you that they're not really aware. They don't get it. And so, so that's when you start saying, So then when I finally did find the lab that I'm going to do my postdoc in, it was a woman. We would do the whole interview that whole day, talked with all, and she was really impressed with my work, and I'd come out of this big famous lab, and she was impressed with that. And so at the end of the day, we're sitting in her office, and she gets a phone call from her son, who was 16 at the time, just got his driver's license, and she was all excited. And I said, and my kid was 8 at the time, and I said, why? I'm going to really be nervous when my son gets his driver's license. She just looks at me and she goes, "You have a son? And you went through this high-powered lab, and you did all this work," and so she was that is the kind of reaction you want, where someone can appreciate what you've gone through to get there.
Yes.
And so that makes, and it's just night and day between these two. Both people are same prestigious level of accomplishment. They're both chairmen of departments at Harvard right now. So and the perspective is just night and day. So that's. So you sit there and you go, yeah. So without her, it might have been difficult to adjust, right? So, but having a role model there who had been through it already, and she too had gone through graduate school with a child, so we had very similar experiences. And so, yeah, it was rewarding.
Thank you, Cindy. And again, there's probably some questions that will follow up relative to that. Eleanor, how about yourself?
Yeah, I haven't had too many impediments along the way. Probably the most noticeable problems I had was when I was working for the Air Force, and that is a good old boys network. And I remember in the laboratories I was working in, I was, one of two women, and the other woman worked in a different lab. We almost never saw each other, and so I was, battling the guys to get heard in meetings and such. And it was a challenge when I went to present my research and results at a meeting inside the Air Force, and I walk into this room, and it's 200 men and me. And I was like, wow. And even worse than that is one of these old, lieutenant colonel or colonel came up to me, and even though I had a badge that said presenter in big, huge letters, he said, "Can you make copies of this for me?" And I was like, "Excuse me, I'm a presenter. I have no idea where the copy machine is any more than you do." I was just sort of agog. I can't believe, but I was a young woman, and I was a pretty green graduate student at this point. I didn't have a whole lot of experience presenting, so I didn't quite know how to handle that sort of stereotype. Yes. She's a woman in the room, she must be a secretary. So that was the most notable. So it does happen, but fortunately in my career it hasn't happened a lot.
Story we probably can all relate to.
That's hilarious.
All right, very good. Elise, how about yourself?
I have a couple good stories. In my first job, I was one of two women on the technical staff, and I was also it was a fairly young company. I was the first woman to become pregnant while being employed there, and they handled it. They did not handle it well at all. They knew that my husband was finishing his PhD pretty soon and would be looking for a job around the time that I was going to have my son, and basically they told me, we think you're going to move, so we don't want you to come back after your maternity leave, which to me was like, he didn't have a job yet, and I was the breadwinner for the family. I was the one supporting the family, and I was just amazed that they could say something like that to me. It was, I think, illegal, but I did not go back after I had my son. So that's the first story. When I went to look for a job in Grand Rapids, I didn't know anybody. I had no network at all. And I did get an interview with a very well-respected engineering firm in town. Went through the interview, went great, had a second interview. They wanted to hire me, but I had one requirement that they would not accept, and that would be that I would be part-time. I only wanted to work 3 days a week, and they said that was unacceptable. So that rigidity and mindset that which I think has loosened up some since 1991 when I was looking for a job. But it was a horrible feeling because I felt like here I have all these years of experience, all this training. I am very capable, and yet no one will hire me. But fortunately, a few weeks later, I got the call from Fishbeck. I came in for an interview. I thought, okay, I got to nail this. I got to prove to them that I'm the best they could ever hire. I won't mention the part-time thing till the very end. And that's what I did. And the two gentlemen who were interviewing me looked at each other, said, oh, well, our wives work part-time. We understand. Yep, I think that'll be okay. And that is the way to get employee loyalty, is to have that flexibility to work with you, with your situation, and allow you to develop accordingly. Now, the problem with, and there are a lot of women who work part-time, especially professional women, more and more all the time. The problem that I encountered in doing that since '91 is that you start getting pigeonholed. You have a task, and that's what you do, and you don't necessarily develop professionally. And I realized about 4 or 5 years ago that another thing that I did a lot in my job was environmental assessment of property. I've been writing these reports for 15 years, and I was totally burned out on it. And I thought, I have another 20 years in my career. I don't want this to be what I do for 20 years. So I looked around and thought, well, what do I want to do? And I to make a long story short, I went back to graduate school, got a second master's in environmental design from MSU, and with the support of my company, they paid half my tuition, with the understanding that once I got through the program, I would be working more hours, which was what I was planning to do all along. And they enabled me to move into the direction that I'm going into a job that didn't exist 20 years ago, but is doing environmental design, sustainable landscape design is kind of my new area of focus, and something that we get more and more work in all the time. So kind of a lot of different things in that, but I wanted to contrast the different ways that companies can operate and how they can be supportive and nurture you, or else they can be rigid, put you in a box. And so you got to be careful when you're looking.
Absolutely. Well, let's go to our last round of questions then, and that is pertinent to what you would perceive as the significant issue facing women in science today. And perhaps even if it's tailored to those women who are thinking about pursuing a career in science, what faces them as they embark on this? Mm-hmm. Molly.
I think any woman is going to be faced with a variety of different hurdles. All of the family issues are incredibly critical. I would love to say that they're changing, and I believe they are to a level. I was fortunate I had a husband who decided that he hated what he was doing, and he would rather role reverse with me. And that was a unique experience. One that I don't know that many, at least in the Midwest, many women would have had that kind of an opportunity in some of the structures and belief systems about family. The other thing is the movement, professional movement ahead awards recognition. As I moved into the specialty niche in the neurofeedback, I was the youngest and one of the few females in that field. And it was interesting to look and see all of the research had been done by men. Mm-hmm. And it's just something that needs to continue to change. The more presence, the more recognition, the more flexibility that we can create, and the more mentoring that we can do with young women coming up.
Thank you very much. Someone else?
Advancement, I think, is a big issue. There is sort of this tendency for men to get promoted before women in particular jobs and whatever, and part of it, I think, has to do with how women think about themselves. You need an ego. You have to go out there and say, I'm as good as he is. And you have to prove it. And sometimes you even have to prove that you're better in order to get the same things. And it's just kind of the way it is. But you can't be quiet. You can't sit in the corner and assume that they're going to recognize you. You have to make a lot of noise. Men, tap their chest. That's what you have to do. It's hard.
This is so true.
I think it's one of the hardest things for women to do. I see a lot of graduate students come through my curriculum, and they're mousy and they're quiet and they don't raise their hand, they don't talk. Yeah. And if they don't learn to overcome that, I was the same way, I have to say.
Yeah. Yes.
And if you want to survive, you've got to be heard. And squeaky wheel gets the grease, and and it's annoying to listen to a male colleague beat his chest, and he's like, but you've got to do it at some point. So I think that's really a hard lesson for women to learn. And career advancement comes with that recognition. So you've got to remind people what you do is important. Sometimes it requires you to get mad, and which is really hard, I think, for a lot of women to. And you're not going to insult these guys. They're used to that. I think that's another thing.
Yeah, we're too nice.
I think it's another thing we don't understand is that when they communicate, they want to beat each other up. And so for a woman to get into that million, they respond differently to you though too, and so. It's a fine line.
Every promotion that I got was the result of me having to force the issue and to document what I had done, write memos, approach people, set up meetings, say why haven't I been promoted, and I have the exact same tendencies, just think, they must know, they must see, and you cannot count on that at all. Yeah.
Interesting note, too. It's not uncommon to just dress according to the moment. I found in many cases that, if I really dulled down and pulled everything back and quieted my exterior presence, that got me farther.
Interesting.
It was very interesting.
Yeah, that is interesting.
I was actually told in a number of cases to drop the makeup, drop the dress,
Really?
do the straight black and the gray.
Oh, really?
Really?
And that was very offensive.
Yeah.
Yes.
Eleanor, anything from you at all?
Yeah, I mean, it's their points are right. Though.
Right there.
I must admit, though, in astronomy, we tend to be very individualist, and you can pretty much, you have the guys coming in with mohawks, and so external appearance is not so important. But in engineering, it is different, and I am, since I work on astronomical instrumentation, which is much more engineering, there are almost no women working in that particular field. That it is, I have to present myself in a much more business-like, stern way to be accepted and have them listen to me. And I've also learned that, I sometimes have to be rude and just interrupt in meetings and just blurt it out there. Otherwise, I'll never get my point out there.
You often
and
feel
that,
like you have to say it 2 or 3 times in the room because they don't hear you the first time for whatever.
And
maybe it's
that's-
because your voice is quiet.
it's a
or
tough
or it's
skill
just-
to learn, and that was a hard one for me in particular. I'm a very quiet person.
Yeah, well, and you've lived your whole life being taught to act a certain way, and then you get into these situations where that's maybe not the most effective way to act for for that situation. So it's hard. You have to be constantly aware of yourself, and it's work.
Find your voice.
Find your voice.
Find
yeah.
your voice. It's very
So it
important.
seems to me, I've heard the common theme being the danger of being pigeonholed into a particular track line. Family balance issues was another theme that seemed to play out. Tooting your horn, for lack of a better word, career advancement correlation with that, and proving yourself, if you will. And then the significant role of mentoring and what that might look like in terms of counseling young women to pursue that. Can we go down that road? I'm just curious, in terms of mentoring, many of you spoke of your parental influences as being some of the most monumental for your life choices. What do we do with individuals who don't have that opportunity? Any thoughts that you might have in that arena, where they might go, what they might think about doing?
Well, there are women. I mean, here at the college, you have the Women in Science program for the 6th graders. I believe I participated in that a couple times. They need to, get a hold of someone if they're really interested in science. I think we lose women in science even, at a grade school level. I think there's a lot of programs for grade school, but high school comes and there's a big drop, I think, there.
Yeah.
The whole hormonal things happens and we get a thing and everything. So it's very important, and I think high school programs really don't continue the way it has up through the junior high area. So I would really think that the community programs need to continue to drive and have high school opportunities. The problem with the institute we have is we can't have people under 18 in the institute from a safety point of view. So that makes it hard for us to really have that kind of program there. But we really need to, I think, in this community, develop high school level. We have great college interactions. We have great grade school interactions. And the big missing piece is in the high school to mentor, to have scientists come in and mentor the students at that age, because they have an interest, but they're kind of scared. They see all these family responsibilities. The family doesn't know science. I think so. There's 2 reasons I think why the family can have an influence, because it's what they know, and so they can direct you in the right direction if you don't know where you're going. I wouldn't know the first thing about going into business. I mean, nobody in my family is a business person, so that's like a whole. But if I really wanted it bad enough, I would have to go out and find it. But the other is that there is some genetics here. So, like you say, you like math because there's a history in your family of math. There's a history in my family of science and biology. So there is some. Now, my brother is not. He's an artist, and he's completely different. But there is that tendency too, and so you feel comfortable with it. So it's an area that you're going to excel in school, even if you didn't want to. My son is really great in math. But he's a B-type person. He's an artist, and so he chose to take the artist track, even though I know he's got a really good, scientific mathematical brain.
Yes.
So it's what you're influenced by too. So there are ways to get into this if you really want to. And you've got to go to programs. You've got to participate in programs and have people help mentor you, I think, to really make it successful.
All right, well, very good. Well, with a watch on the clock here, I thought perhaps we might open it up to the audience to have an opportunity to ask some questions of our panelists. So with that, Marianne, I'm going to hand this over to you, and we'll see what we might come up with. Questions?
Well, I have one. I happen to know from having Eleanor here for a couple of days that, and Cindy, you mentioned this, in one way or another, every one of you as panelists has mentioned this, that if there were women working and women in positions above you, just the understanding level that was there made a difference in your lives. And maybe I'll have Eleanor start this, because when I was doing research and contacted Eleanor, I was looking for a woman's astronomy powerhouse. And to tell you the truth, it was very difficult to find any particular school, but I did find one. The University of California at Santa Cruz, I found Sandra Moore Faber as a lead astronomer, and all these women researchers. And so I'm wondering, first I'll start with Eleanor, and then to have the rest of you address it. You know, in very particular, I guess, as an answer, what do you think, how do you think your course would have been different without those few women that you found in leadership roles, and how do we have those women for the future women like yourselves?
Well, in general, I think I'm just darn stubborn enough. I would have done it with or without role models. I with my own talents and what I enjoyed doing, I actually couldn't even envision doing anything else. That there were a few women here and there, and female-friendly environments enough in my education to allow me to go. That made it much more comfortable, much more easy to find my voice and stand up for myself and my talents and my skills in what I was doing. But certainly, when you have a bad day, it's really nice to have someone in your same, a peer to talk about. It's like, oh, I can't believe this person did this. And I had an incident in graduate school where there was a man who was sexually harassing the female graduate students in the physics department. And at the time when he was doing was not illegal. He was stalking a girl in the math department. He had a habit of going from science department to harass women. He didn't see it that way in his mind, but having someone, I found I was coming late to classes so that I'd come after he was so I could choose a seat not near this fellow. It was really disruptive, but there were other female graduate students, and I said, "There's this guy. What is he doing? Is he doing this to you?" And it turned out it was a whole pattern of behavior. If you don't have women to confide in, even at a peer level or at a supervisory level, you end up stuck. It's like, what do you do? And so I think that's an important key role that women play. Even they don't even have to be necessarily in your field, but just a support structure like that to handle the bad times. The good times, everything's great. It doesn't matter who you're around.
Yeah, I think having women was very important. Although I'm like her, I think I would have done it anyway. I mean, I just think you've decided this is what you're good at. You really love it, and it doesn't matter what kind of obstacles. I think surviving my graduate program with this somewhat, chauvinist male really proved to me that I could do it. Right? No, it wouldn't matter whether I had a woman role model or not. In fact, I wanted to go to another male lab for my postdoc, and I happened to go to a woman just more by default. But and I have a male boss now, and I live mostly in where there are very few women. And you're right. And so at this point in my life, we go to scientific meetings, and so I run to the women at the scientific meetings, right? I mean, those are the people that which is probably not as good as it should. I should be, doing equally. But there's this tendency to run to them and say, "Oh God, this is what's happening in my institute," and it's just, they have a more sympathetic shoulder. The men are kind of like, chin up,
Yeah, exactly.
Swallow it, right? Move on.
Yeah, it's a different.
But women have a mental need, emotional need to, I think, discuss things, whereas men don't. So, and my male colleagues don't understand it. And I've tried to have this discussion with why it's important to recruit more women to our institute, and they're just like, well, it doesn't really matter as long as they're good scientists. It does matter for the other women around, and so you have to ask how important is it from a science point of view? Maybe not. From an environment, working environment to encourage equal contributions. And I think women approach science from a different way than men do as well. And there's a lot of articles that have been published on that topic, and so, and I can see it, just their management styles are different. So you can see in contrast, how would I want to run my lab in this situation and everything. And I had one woman, famous woman scientist, say to me, I tell all my women postdocs to go to men labs for their postdocs because they need to learn to be in the male environment. So,
Interesting.
Yes.
Another question?
I have to go teach a class, but I want to thank you. In the fall, Sharon Caldwell Newton from the Women's Resource Center here in town came to speak to our Women's Studies class, and she said that one of the things that women entering into the higher levels of education and such have to do is learn assertiveness training, and all four of you were saying the same thing in different ways. And so I wanted to thank you for that. It's something we're kind of talking about developing for our Women's Studies program. The other thing is the men should be taught to do Women's Ways of Knowing. I think that's a real good book to train them. It was good for me.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Yes.
Other questions? Yeah, really Phil Donahue thing. He used to run through his audience too.
That's
remember?
right.
Thank you all for being here. I just, as you spoke a little bit about this assertiveness that needs to be a part of your career path, how did you find the ability to do that? And at what moment did it occur to you, and then did you act on it right at that point, or did it take you a while to get to that level?
Talking 9 to 5. A book was published. I read that book right at the end of my graduate studies, PhD studies. And it was at that point that I realized that the dynamic between me and my PI is all the women would go in his office and come out crying, and all the men would walk in his office, come out yelling. And I never understood, intuitively you weren't sure why that was happening. And that book really explains the one-on-one dynamic between male-male, female-female, and male-female. And so when two males get in a room, it's this, I'm better than you, beat your chest. And so my boss was expecting that from me, but I didn't realize it. Because when a woman goes in and the male starts beating his chest, she says, oh, okay, I'm down here. And so I should have been beating my chest back. And so that's when that's when I started realizing that I was approaching this all wrong. So that book was incredibly valuable to me, and I highly recommend it for women, just because it just talks about the crazy dynamic, and it all has to do with testosterone and whatever. But and when two women get together, they pat each other on the back and they hug and they sympathize, and that's why we like to find women and scientists that can understand where we're coming from. And so that is a dynamic, and so I find myself doing this now in my job when I get to go with the males. I've got to tell them about what great wonderful thing I did, and they're going to tell me what great wonderful thing they did, and you're constantly yeah. So you need some downtime sometimes.
I feel very fortunate. I was coached very much with my mother and father. My father was an engineer, a civil engineer in designing highways, and a minister on the weekends. So from the get-go, he coached me through all sorts of situations to stand up, and I was, both his little girl and his little boy.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I had to discover my voice in graduate school. One of the disadvantages actually of going to a women's college was that I didn't learn this male beating my chest thing. You'd have discussions in class, and everyone would very nicely wait till you were finished, and then you could have your say, and the next person. And it was all very nice. It was fascinating discussion. It was great, but it was a different environment. Then I got to grad school, and in seminars, I'd be one or maybe two women in the class if I lucky, and the guys would just pipe up, and I'm like, but, and I'd keep waiting for them to finish and be all polite. And I think it was my second or third year of graduate school. It's like, I've had enough of this, and just started blurting stuff out, and no one even blinked that I was rude and cutting people off. It was just not, they didn't even think twice about it.
Well, yeah, when I was at Davis, I was in a pretty mellow lab with a fair amount of women, so it never felt like an issue. I think in my professional career, I probably spent way too much time being submissive, and I didn't, for the longest time, I really didn't have any mentor to tell me how to deal with it. I would just get to a point where I'd get angry, and then I would be more assertive. In more recent years, I think the man who hired me has been a good mentor to help me to understand the company politics and how things kind of really work in a way that I didn't really understand. So having someone with that kind of insight was very important for me, to just sit and talk and go, oh, okay, so then probably the best thing to do would be, like when I wanted to go to graduate school and I wanted them to pay for half of it, how do I get that to happen? He'd say, I think you need to write a memo and list all the pros and how it's going to help the company. The bottom line is it needs to help the company. And so having someone like that has just been wonderful.
Anyone else?
Was there any other careers that you guys would have loved to accomplish that was totally opposite from what you're doing right now?
I think I went through 7 departments before I ended up in psychology.
Yeah. Well, I certainly have 2 hobbies that, I sing in operas, and I'm also a photographer as a hobby, and I think either one of those I could, easily, slide into, and, as well as other science careers. I love geology and botany, and so I dabble in these things, but astronomy has always been my biggest love, so I've landed there.
I feel like I'm just getting into what I really have always wanted to do all my life, which for me it's using both the left and the right sides of my brain, because I never felt like I was a pure scientist. I like science, but I also liked nature and form and color and shape. And I finally, I'm almost 50, and I finally figured out how you can have a job and put both of those things together. So my goal right now is just to keep continuing in that path and get work.
I actually do woodworking, which I really love, and I often thought, maybe I could have built a woodworking business. But I had no knowledge in business, so it kind of deterred me. But I do like to work with my hands and create things, but I really had no way to in my mind, to market or understand how that process works. So I used it as a hobby. The other thing is I really liked forensic science. So as a kid, I used to watch the program on TV, but I knew my impression at that time was I had to get my MD, and go through it. I knew I didn't want to do that, so I felt that was closed to me, but I guess these days it's kind of changed a bit, and you can now go into forensic science without actually having an MD. But that would have been my second science career, I think.
Okay, well, I'd also like to thank all of our panelists, and hopefully you all realize by nature of doing what you're doing and who you are role models yourselves. I wonder if in closing, if you could say 1 or 2 things as a role model, what they might be. If you could tell somebody considering these careers, here's what you need to know.
Well, I would think that the main thing is believe in yourself. If you know you're good at it, don't let anyone tell you you can't do it. Just, if you need to find a mentor, go out and find them. They're out there. They may not be easy to find, but they're there. And just stick to it. And just that self-confidence is really key to succeeding in anything, and to don't let people discourage you.
I have a couple things. Know yourself. What really excites you, what really fascinates you or interests you, and go down that road. Don't try and put yourself in a box that doesn't feel right. And the other thing is work on your communication skills. In my job, it is vitally important that you know how to write and how to communicate clearly. And a problem that a lot of young graduates have is they cannot write, and you will lose your job. I mean, you will not progress. You need to be able to be a clear communicator, both writtenly and also verbally.
Definitely. Go ahead.
That's fine. I was going to say.
Slipped out of my mind.
Persistence. And one of the things, too, I usually keep on hand in the office Super Balls. And they're faceted. They're cut into faceted. So they're actually very pretty, and they look kind of like a glass Super Ball. And the reason that I like to hand them out and keep them around is because no matter how much of a dead end you feel like you've stumbled into, all you need to do is pivot where you're looking and how you're looking at it, and you'll find those doors that'll open up. So that persistence and, like you said, the belief in yourself. Sometimes you just need to take and shift your angle and your perspective, and you'll find your way through.
So background, when you go to a job interview, you go to talk to somebody about what what you want to do some research on the person that you're talking to. Don't just walk in blindly and say, I'm interested in this. But so do your background work. If you really are enthusiastic about your area, your field, go online, learn about the topics in the field. Bring some knowledge to the person that you want to talk to and interact and learn about. I find so many graduate students come in and they're clueless because they haven't done their homework. The information is out there. It used to be you couldn't get that information, but today it's out there. There's no excuse to walk into my office and not have any clue as to what I do. It's out there, even if it's just all you know is prostate cancer. But you got to come in and say, I really love prostate cancer. Connect with the people, right? Because if you are passionate about it, it'll come out. I can tell whether you're passionate or not if you've done your homework. Even if you aren't passionate, at least do your homework and make me believe you are, right? So I think that's an important skill that I think sometimes gets lost. That you really need to do the research behind what you're after. And PhD, that you're always learning. You get to move a new field, a new area. You've got a whole, you get all that world out there. You've got to learn about a topic that you didn't know anything about in order to be successful. And that should start at a fairly early age. Good idea.
Well, at this point, then we'll wrap up our day. Molly, we thank you so much. Cindy as well, and Eleanor and Elise, thank you for your time today, for the great words of wisdom and inspiration that undoubtedly you will be not only in this venue, but as this presentation is offered in through media settings that we'll be broadcasting it as well. Thank you. We do know there are materials that some of you have prepared and have available to anyone who has an interest, and they're in the back on the counter on the back of the auditorium. And I want to invite you as well to consider the many opportunities that are still here for both the rest of this week and all of next week for our focus on celebration of women in STEM fields. Thank you once again for joining us today. Bye now.
Thank you.
It was wonderful.
Really.
I was just like so inspired. That is going to be a